Hi there, Eric Bakker, naturopath. Thanks for tuning in to this channel. I appreciate your viewing these videos. I have a question here from somebody in Sydney, Australia, and the question is, Eric, what can you eat when your intestines are inflamed? So that's an interesting question. So we've just recently spoken about some inflammatory markers, that can be found in the stool test, for example, that could spell out whether you've got inflammation or not. Sometimes these markers can be found in the blood test, but more accurately, if you've got a gut problem with inflammation, you're better off assessing the stool for these markers. So we spoke about lysozyme, we spoke about calprotectin, so you may want to look back at those markers because they could, have some bearing on what I'm going to talk about here right now with inflammatory bowel disease. So if your intestines are inflamed, if we're looking at IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, we're talking about the large intestine, particularly with ulcerative colitis, because it's colitis, which is the colon. However, Crohn's disease is an inflammatory bowel disease that can live right from the mouth right through the whole GI tract. It could be anywhere. It could be in the small bowel, the large bowel, it could be anywhere, in the stomach, in the throat even. So when you say your intestine is inflamed, I'm going to talk about inflammatory bowel disease in general here. So I have completed some videos on inflammatory bowel disease. You may want to go and have a look at those under the playlists because I'm sure you'll find some. So when you've got inflammatory bowel disease, you certainly will want to be doing it, particularly if it's bad, if it's active and flared up, you'll be wanting to doing a food allergy test to determine if you've got food allergies, and what the key allergies are, and take those foods the heck out of the diet. That's going to help considerably. Yeah, I think that's a fair call. If it's particularly if you're taking medications for inflammatory bowel disease, that's quite a good thing to do to start with. So an IgG, serum-based food allergy test is quite a smart thing to do. But you will know already, generally by default, what foods are flaring you up and making you feel bad, and which foods are quite neutral in their activity on your gut. So you probably worked a few things out already. But suffice to say, alcohol and caffeine, and heavy foods like fatty pork, takeaway foods, soda drinks, alcohol. These are all no-brainers. You just don't, engage in these kind of foods. They're all the wrong kind of foods to have when your intestines are inflamed. Candy and takeaway, and these typical foods that many people will graze on or snack on at parties. Junk foods, these sorts of things. Better options, dietary options with inflammatory bowel disease are the cooling foods and the soothing foods and anti-inflammatory foods. So, for example, proteins, fish, the oily fish or the omega-3 rich fish species are quite good to have with inflamed bowel. Quite a smart option there. I would go for the lighter meats like particularly fish and chicken. I would avoid egg, generally for a few weeks. I would avoid dairy products. I would avoid bananas, oranges, peanuts, soy, and legumes in general, like chickpeas and beans. These things I'd probably pull aside for several weeks, focus more on the leaner proteins, like the chicken, organic free-range chicken. But if you're a vegan, you may want to have tempeh. Tempeh, for example, a cultured kind of tofu, which I quite like. Even though I said avoid soy, but if you're a vegan, and that's your sole, one of your top forms of protein, you could be looking at foods like that. And also looking at the kind of legumes or foods that don't aggravate your gut. Some will and some won't. Be careful of nuts and seeds and grains with inflammatory bowel disease. You will be losing weight with this condition, but you don't want to lose too much, so you want to make sure that you put some carbs in there that are going to give you energy and stop you from dropping too many pounds as well. That could be quinoa or brown rice, which is one of my favourite combinations. Anti-inflammatory foods are not just the fish. We're thinking about blueberries, we're thinking about pomegranates, we're thinking about adding garlic and ginger to the diet, spinach, asparagus, all good foods, broccoli, kale, all good foods to eat with inflammatory bowel disease. Foods high in vitamin A, for example, also very good for the lining of the mucous membranes. You could be looking at wheat germ oil. You can look at carrots, for example. You can look at some sweet potatoes if they don't flare up too much. High vitamin A foods help to build the lining of the gut. Smart move to do this. Vitamin E foods. The fat-soluble vitamins are quite important with this condition. So do a bit of Googling on foods high in fat-soluble vitamins. These are very smart to have. Flaxseed oil, good addition. Walnuts and fish oil, all good anti-inflammatory. Turmeric extract, another good thing to have. You can also cook with turmeric like you can with ginger. You actually buy turmeric and grate that up and add that to your meals. So turmeric and ginger are fantastic additions if you've got inflamed intestines. So yeah, be careful of the beverages. Green tea, but coffee and tea and alcohol are not really the best for inflammatory bowel. Alcohol's the worst thing you can do. That's just really, abusing your body if you've got inflammatory disease to have alcohol. So I hope that gives you a bit of information on, some foods to consume with inflamed intestines. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate, you looking at these videos, and do subscribe if you're a non-subscriber. And please click on the link below if you want to get my free report if you haven't already done so. Thank you.